Hello and welcome to a co-production of WION and VOA. This edition we're getting to you live from India. Let's start our top story. Well, at last year's NATO summit in Madrid, the alliance for the first time recognized China as a security challenge. Next year's meet for a summit in Lithuania. They are set to take concrete action. Voice of America's White House Bureau Chief Patsy Widakuswara looks at NATO's need to forge a coherent approach to what it sees as the China threat and the obstacles it may face in doing so.
The war on Ukraine and tensions in the Taiwan Strait are geographically distant, but geopolitically the two are interconnected. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said earlier this year in Tokyo.
If President Putin wins in Ukraine, this would send a message that authoritarian regimes can achieve their goals through brute force. This is dangerous. Beijing is watching closely and learning lessons that may influence its future decisions.
Should Chinese leader Xi Jinping decide to invade Taiwan, the US and NATO could be dragged into the conflict, a contingency the alliance needs to plan for. Last year at the Madrid summit, NATO's strategic concept called out China as posing systemic challenges to Euro-Atlantic security. This year at the summit in Vilnius, Lithuania, they'll need to translate the concept into action. Beyond Taiwan and freedom of navigation concerns, NATO is anxious about Beijing's growing control of critical European infrastructure, such as 5G, and its influence operation.
So cyber and hybrid activities, but also more generally, Chinese political influence in Europe is, of course, of growing concern.
Indo-Pacific partners Australia, Japan, New Zealand, and South Korea attended the NATO summit last year and will again participate in Vilnius.
These Indo-Pacific countries, they have a unique experience engaging with the PRC and can bring some valuable perspective to that discussion.
While allies may agree that the China challenge is real, they differ over how to address it. Many European countries rely heavily on Chinese investment and trade. According to EU data, China accounts for almost 10% of Europe's exports and about 20% of its imports. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News at the White House.
And well, joining us to talk more about the NATO meet is Jessica Stone from VOA. She's live with us from the White House. Jessica, thanks very much for talking to us this evening. Now, the NATO meet this time is going to be hectic, busy, comes in the backdrop of the Russia-Ukraine war. And Sweden's Prime Minister visited the White House this week. What's the status of its proposal to join the NATO?
Well, we don't know if it's going to happen before the meeting in Vilnius. We do know that the White House has expressed its firm support for Sweden's application. But Jens Stoltenberg, meeting with Turkey, Sweden and Finland on Thursday, said they need more time to work out the details, particularly because Hungary and Turkey are still blocking its application. Hungary's case is basically we won't be the last one to block it if Turkey goes along with it. But Turkey has a more nuanced and direct set of asks. They have asked Sweden to work on Islamophobia, to work on counterterrorism, and in fact Sweden has actually implemented some reforms, particularly around terrorism. You know, both of these countries, Sweden and Finland, applied in February 2022. NATO already accepted Finland earlier this year, but it has yet to accept Sweden on the basis of Ankara being the one holding things up. At the same time, Ankara is asking Washington for F-16 fighter jets. And basically, President Biden has said to them, look, if you can get Sweden into NATO, we'll then address the F-16. So he's using that as a bit of a carrot and a stick. But he's not entirely empowered to do the F-16 deal, of course, because the U.S. Congress has to vote on whether to make good on that deal.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, that matter still remains up in the air. But Jessica, this week NATO is also expected to address China's support for Russia during the invasion of Ukraine. The U.S. Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, is in Beijing for now. This is a face-to-face meeting with the Chinese side. What sort of progress are the two sides making? These are the world's two largest economies.
Well, I think it's fair to characterize the fact that they're meeting in person in China for the first time since Janet Yellen took office as the U.S. Treasury Secretary more than 2 years ago. That in and itself is, of course, progress. She's already on record as speaking to American companies in China during her visit, being very concerned about the export regulations that China is implementing and the counter-espionage law that's brand new, which we don't know yet how that will affect foreign direct investment and foreign companies in general. So she's expected to bring that up with her Chinese counterparts. We do not believe that she will be meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping as Secretary Blinken did earlier. But Washington looking for clarity on Beijing's counter-espionage law, looking for more clarity on some of these export controls recently implemented also on critical minerals, which go into semiconductor chips. A lot of the arguments around business between the two sides, of course, center on producing semiconductor chips. China has many of the raw materials, doesn't have all of the manufacturing know-how, but the U.S. is trying to prevent any export of machines that make semiconductor chips, which, of course, we know go into so many things that we use every day. Janet Yellen's visit expected to stay through Sunday, and she is expected to meet with some of her new counterparts in charge of the financial strategy underway in Beijing. Ravi?
Right, Jessica, thanks for that. Stay with us. We have more news from the United States. And, well, the nephew of the former U.S. President John F. Kennedy is running for president. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr., whose father was slain during a White House bid in 1968, is considered a long shot for the Democratic nomination despite his family name and some favorable early polls. Voice of America's Veronica tells us more about this.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. announced he would challenge President Joe Biden for the Democratic Party nomination, saying corporations have too much government influence with devastating results.
To poison our children and our people with chemicals and pharmaceutical drugs, to strip mine our assets, to hollow out the middle class and keep us in a constant state of war.
Kennedy is well known as the son of late U.S. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, but also as a longtime skeptic of vaccines, promoting scientifically discredited theories. He has called for sealing off the U.S.-Mexico border and suggested that prescription drugs are responsible for a wave of mass shootings in the United States. In June, Real Clear Politics calculated the average support for Kennedy among Democrats was around 14%, compared to 64% for Biden. Analysts say that although his campaign is showing signs of early support, it's unclear what policies he's recommending that will connect with voters.
We want to have safe vaccines. We want to think hard about going into Ukraine, which is something that he's opposed. We want to think hard about guns and what's causing the gun violence that we have. The trouble is it's not clear where his remedies lead us.
As an environmental lawyer, RFK Jr. could appeal to eco-conscious Democratic primary voters or to those who plan to cast protest votes out of frustration with Biden's policies. But political scientist Hans Noel says Kennedy will not be able to unseat Biden for his party's nomination.
It's not likely that it's going to have a change in the outcome, but of course it could be messy and people would talk about it, and it could show frustration with Biden.
Still, some think Biden's team should keep an eye on Kennedy's campaign, given his polling numbers.
A lot of people are wondering, okay, Biden is going to be over 80 years old by the time of the election next year. Who are our other options?
Both the Biden and the Kennedy campaigns declined VOA's requests for comment. Veronica Valderas Iglesias, VOA News, Washington.
Well, most U.S. presidents have always run for a second term, even as the political temperatures there rising for the presidential election season in America. And Jessica Stone is still with us from the White House. Another story that made it to the headlines this week from Washington was, Jessica, that we learned that cocaine was discovered in the West Wing of the White House. What's the latest on the investigation so far by the Justice Department in this?
Well, there's the Justice Department and Secret Service investigation, and now we just learned this morning that the House Republicans are also going to begin a congressional inquiry. But in terms of the Secret Service investigation, you know, they found this over the weekend on Sunday in the West Wing lobby, which is a workspace. It is not a living space. It is not the East Wing where the family of the president lives and normally uses the East Wing to enter and exit. It was found in the lobby, as I said, in a plastic envelope, and Secret Service is continuing to really review all of the security footage of the comings and goings of the West Wing, which is just, you know, basically 50 feet from me here to my left. They want to understand how it got there. Yes, a couple of days ago, Karine Jean-Pierre, the spokesperson for the White House, was asked about drug testing, about the possibility of drug testing. She didn't rule out the possibility that employees could be drug tested, but we have no information yet as to whether that has been implicated, and really not a lot of new information on what the Secret Service are finding. Of course, there has been a lot of talk, particularly in the conservative media here, about the possibility of whether Hunter Biden, the president's son, who has waged a public battle against cocaine addiction, could have left this here. We have no information from the White House or from Secret Service to indicate that that could be the case. President Joe Biden was out of town over the weekend for the 4th of July holidays, and family members just came back, including the president, earlier this week. Again, the West Wing is the workspace of the White House. It's also a place where people come through to tour and where people leave their belongings while they go on a White House tour. So a lot of possibilities here. We'll continue to follow it for you.
Right, absolutely, Jessica. Clearly, the Hunter Biden angle would put this out of spin completely. But moving on to Donald Trump now, and the U.S. Justice Department, well, has released previously blacked out portions of the application to search the former President Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago estate. What new information do we have on that?
Well, the critical thing that we discovered when the Associated Press and many other outlets sued to get the Department of Justice to further redact the applications that was made for the raid that ultimately took place in Mar-a-Lago last August of the president's home, is that we learned that there was security footage implementing or indicating rather that someone was moving boxes in the days and hours ahead of when the FBI and the DOJ had been asked to come and gather any remaining confidential or classified documents. This happened on the same day, of course, as the charges against William Nauta, the Trump aide charged in connection with moving those documents and concealing those documents. He faced federal charges, and he answered those charges yesterday in court, pleading not guilty. His attorney has asked for a jury trial, and of course we know that President Trump himself has also pleaded not guilty to the 37 felony charges against him. So this case will go forward, but again, the critical information in the redacted portion that was unredacted of these documents, security video from inside Mar-a-Lago showing someone moving boxes in the hours and days just ahead of when the FBI and the DOJ were supposed to come, giving some credibility to the idea that they would feel the necessity to raid Mar-a-Lago to ultimately obtain those documents, having seen that security footage and possibly thinking that they were not being told the truth by the Trump team about giving them all of the information that they were asked for. Barabi?
Wow, Jessica, some crucial details there coming up. Always a pleasure talking to you. Thanks very much, Jessica Stone, WION, joining us this evening.
You bet. Good to be here.